Certainly, this past year, the pandemic has been a disruption.
It has, and I think the jury's still out and will be for quite a while on what was the overall impact. Was it a benefit overall, or was it a horrible thing overall,
All
or
right,
what?
all right. Stop now. Stop
Yes,
now.
yes, yes.
Stop
Got it.
now.
Got it. We got to get into our
because there's stuff that I'm trying so hard to save for the podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faitheism Project podcast. My name is Alan Katz, and I've always been grateful to Hebrew School for making me the atheist I am today.
And I'm Randy Lovejoy, pastor on the fringes, and really a storyteller. As I've looked back and realized that that's actually more of what I do than I thought it was. So, yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think that's incredibly accurate. Speaking of a story,
yep.
Randy and I have a story that happened on Saturday.
Yes.
Just this past weekend. The strangest thing now, Randy and I, we've known each other for, almost 20 years.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, almost 20 years. Our sons were in the same, classes together, the same school together, and, played same sports teams and same social circle. And we started this podcast when the pandemic started, because we had been working on something along these lines, and the pandemic made it absolutely pointless. There was no way and you know what? In retrospect, we were wrong-headed. We had it completely wrong. We should have been doing a podcast from the get-go.
That's right.
And so, in a way, perversely, the pandemic forced us to if we wanted to do this idea in the next, so long as the pandemic was raging, we were going to have to do it this way. And lo and behold, we were, what is number 37.
Yeah. It's awesome. Awesome. It's so different than what we planned, but isn't that the way life goes?
Isn't
that the way life goes?
And so, we've done this over the course of the past 13, 14 months without ever being in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
Through the magic of Zoom, like so many of boy, like before the pandemic, what was Zoom? What was a Zoom call? Anyway, so on Saturday, my wife is a ballet teacher, and this year, of course, she could not do a practical spring recital. It was going to have to be virtual. But rather than just do it, people performing solo in their living rooms or their bedrooms or wherever they could find a little bit of space to be her ballet students, she choreographed ballets that we could perform outdoors. And we began doing this before things were easing up as they, as they are now. But the whole point was to do a virtual ballet in various locations around Los Angeles. And I've already shot a couple that take place in a park near here called Debs Park with some beautiful views of Los Angeles. And one of them is going to be at the beach, which we're going to shoot this coming Saturday. And Helen had scouted her location. She had this in mind. This is going to be a little bit of make it up as we go along, because I had never seen the location. There's no way for the dancers to rehearse in location prior to doing the ballet. It's just not practical. So a lot of this has to be on Saturday. I went to the beach location with Helen so she could show me, since I'm going to be shooting it, what the situation is. And there's a rock jetty right at that point at the very northern end of a beach here in LA called Will Rogers State Beach. And at the very, very southern end is this rock jetty. And so where Helen wants to do the ballet is on one side of the rock jetty. Well, it turned out on the other side of the rock jetty in the beach, there was a party going on. Somebody was it was a birthday party. And apparently one of the partygoers first was on the jetty, and she saw my wife and thought to herself, "Oh my God, that's Miss Helen, my wife," and ran over, and it was one of my one of my wife's students, ballet students. Well, yet it turned out she's in this party. And then another of the party goers suddenly comes down over the rocks and sees that it's us. And it's Cheryl Lovejoy. It's
my wife.
Randy's wife.
Yeah. Yeah.
So first of all, it is a surreal experience when someone you are absolutely not expecting comes and says hello, and you're staring at them thinking, all right.
Yeah. How does this work?
Now, in all honesty, I do smoke a lot of weed. And for the first time, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, I am hallucinating. I am absolutely, I have convinced myself that Cheryl Lovejoy is standing here. This is nuts. But then we started having a conversation. And Randy is just on the other side of the rocks. And this can't possibly be real, but okay, we go over to the other side of the rocks, and there is Randy. And so the odd thing about,
I mean, I have to say that our connecting there was really the high point for me, because we had taken my son to golf a long way away. And then we'd driven an hour to get to the beach after his 2-hour golf lesson. And we were kind of like, well, do we stay here? Do we try and get him a ride back? Because
you had connections to the same birthday party. You had connections to the same birthday party.
That's right. He was invited to that birthday party. And so we felt bad because he was missing some of it with his golf. And we're kind of going through what a lot of parents, how much, let's get him out there. How much do we connect? What's okay, what's not? And we're like, well, there are going to be a bunch of kids there. They're probably not going to be masked. We're all vaccinated, but he's not vaccinated. All this stuff. Not to mention just I hadn't been out of the house that long in probably a year, sadly, because I work from home. And so by the time I got to the beach, I was just kind of like, oh man, all right, we're at the beach. Now I got to go talk to people but so I was making it work. But then when Cheryl came over, she had actually said, Randy, you want to go on a walk with me? And I was the lame husband, like, I'm actually sitting here on the beach. I think I'm just going to hang out here. But then she brings Alan and Helen over, and it was just like, oh, yeah, this is great. And so after our conversation and reconnect and all that,
well, I just want to jump one thing in here.
Go for it.
And it's among the things that the pandemic has done. It has altered. Now, I know I'm vaxxed. I know Randy's vaxxed. And I knew that on the beach.
Right.
Now, I wasn't wearing a mask. Randy wasn't wearing a mask. And it's funny.
Yeah.
My impulse, and I went with it.
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent.
Yeah.
I thought, screw it. And I said, give me a hug, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, first of all, Randy's much taller than me. So even if the pandemic was raging where his face is and where my face, they're nowhere near each other.
We're different elevations.
Nowhere, different. Oh my God. I mean, Randy, I'm sure you must get height sickness, height sickness all the time.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, but the best thing about the whole thing was getting to hug you, man.
Yeah.
I gotta say, not only was it a treat to see you in the flesh, but to actually, because we're both vaxxed, actually get to hug you.
Yeah.
Physically. Yeah. And it felt weird, but I am glad I did it. And it was awkward, but I didn't care because God damn it. We are at the end of this part of it for now. God,
I mean, the CDC just came out with, so even the CDC thinks that. So, it's awesome. But it was funny how awkward it was and yet how wonderful it was. And so how much of a reminder it was to me, wow, hanging out with people physically is actually a wonderful thing. It's a great thing. And, I'd kind of, not that I thought, oh no, don't want to be with people, but I'd kind of forgotten that over the years.
Oh yes, these muscles must be worked some more. Hey, then just after that, Helen and I, then we worked another muscle. We went into Santa Monica and we had dinner at a restaurant which had some indoor seating. And this place has a great bar with a really high ceiling. Yeah. And Helen really wanted to sit at the bar. One of the things that she has missed through the times of the pandemic is not just going to a restaurant, but sitting at a bar and having a nice drink and eating at the bar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we found this place in Santa Monica that was exactly that. And that was transcendently good. They could have served us dog food.
That's right. You would have been
It
like,
would have
this is
tasted
so
brilliant.
good.
Now, the food happened to be brilliant, but
yeah. Sure.
it was a lovely post-pandemic kind of day.
Well, that's the thing. And I think, you know, we are in some ways ending a chapter.
Yes.
That in the human story.
Yes.
That, you know,
Look at us bringing this around.
That we share with some other humans that have gone before us, but it's not something like every generation had a pandemic. A number have, but not all of them. And but we're
all part of a club now.
So yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see, you know, what's the next chapter. It's almost like if we were reading a book, it's like, oh, okay, I'm coming near the conclusion, but then something will happen right before the end of the chapter to make me want to read the next chapter. I don't know what that is, but you know, but it sort of feels that way. Like, you know, like, I don't know. It's going to be fun to see what happens.
Which ironically, that's what we wanted to talk about today. Well, I coughed through it. Excuse me.
Which ironically is what we wanted to talk about today.
Ironically.
I was just saying that for you.
So if the question we were asking today, if human life, the entirety of human life, ours, but everyone else's before us, if that was a story, what story would it be? Yeah. You go first.
And, you know, I'm just going to add a little more. I think it necessarily is a story, at least from a human perspective, because that's how we do life. I remember I've done a little experiment different times when I'm like walking, you know, this is a pre-pandemic, when I was walking the Silver Lake Reservoir, for example. And as I'd pass by people who were walking together, I'd just listen. Every single one of them's telling a story, and they're telling story after story after story. I don't know how many stories we tell ourselves or tell others each day, but it's kind of crazy. You would think we'd burn out on stories after a while, but we don't. It works. It's how we do so much alike.
Stories sustain us.
Yeah.
You know, during my dark phase, I kind of and I lost touch with my sense of myself as a storyteller. One of the things that I'm happy to have gotten back in the aftermath is storytelling is essential. Not that I'm essential, but storytelling and storytellers are essential to just being human. The storytellers are really, we have our fingers on the pulse of the rest of the tribe. And stories really are a reflection of the tribe back on itself. It's how the tribe sees itself, how the tribe sees its heroes and its villains, how it sees even just the quotidian annoyances that make it laugh and that make it cry. It really, what we want to see in our stories more than anything is us reflected back. Now,
and they also open our minds to new thoughts as well. You know, that I mean, that's part of why I think we share with each other stories is, number one, because sometimes when we're telling the story, we come up with something in our own minds. But on top of that, when we're sharing with other people and interacting, you know, that's what opens up new possibilities. Like, oh, wait, I've always seen it this way, but you see it this way. Look at that. Maybe that makes some sense to me. You know,
isn't the whole point of telling someone the good news to introduce them to a whole new way of thinking?
Well, that's the idea. Yeah, when it's done well. But like any kind of storytelling, there's good and there's bad storytelling. So
it always makes me laugh when the atheist steps into the, hey, here, there's no Christians to it. Very helpfully. Here, let me carry your water for you.
And then the pastor, then the pastor says, and there's good and bad storytelling about the good things. You know, that's kind of it's like, wait a minute, am I supposed to be saying that? I don't know. But you know, because there are, you know, and the other part of it that at least I hope we can connect to is, you know, our experience and the stories that we use aren't always, you know, they're not the exact same thing. And oftentimes we're borrowing other people's stories, but then integrating them into the experience
Yes.
that we have. And to me, that's where so much of the really innovative, interesting stuff happens, is when you're starting with a story that's already there and connecting it to your context and your experience, and then integrating it or developing it in a new way, or even coming up with a completely different story. It's fascinating.
It's a very natural way to add into a story as new players come in.
Yeah.
As we all come into being, into our sentientness, as we all begin to stop being children, we look around and we think, oh, okay, so this is how the world works. Oh, this is how you all think the world works. No, let me tweak this a little bit. I see it slightly differently. And the next thing you know, a variation on the theme is born.
Well, I mean, the chances of, my 15-year-old telling the same story about human life that I would tell are slim to none. And especially after this pandemic, because his experience of ninth grade and my experience of ninth grade, completely different. I mean, there's so little in common, and that's not, that's just for starters. But I think that's the thing, is each generation, each generation should grapple with their story. And that doesn't mean you toss out the stories that have come before, but it does mean that you say, okay, given where we are and the stuff we're struggling with and the questions we're asking, how does this story need to be shaped? Because my story is not going to answer all of the questions that my 15-year-old has had. And that's okay. It's not like my story is supposed to answer every question that anyone could ever have, but it's going to need to be changed and shaped because there's going to be new questions that are being asked in new contexts. So
the human story.
Yep.
The larger, I mean, and one of the remarkable things about living through a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, is that it is one of those moments. It is a pivotal moment for the entire human race.
That's right.
And
it's going to change the story. I mean, it's going to be in the story.
Literally, we are at one of those moments that will change the direction, the next direction our collective story goes.
And it's going to cross cultures, like you said. I even think of, a story of a great flood that is, yes, it's in the Bible, but it's also in other cultures. Yeah. And it's told in different ways. But, something happened at some point to make people have to grapple with, this kind of a situation where there's a great flood. Well, we've got a great pandemic, how are we going to grapple with that? What's the story going to be? What's the origin of, COVID? We're still battling over that. Will we ever decide what it is, or will there just be multiple stories about it started here and was a part of this, that, or the other? All of that, it's just going to be interesting to see how that develops over time. But I think, that's where any story, you've got to start at the beginning, right? With any story, so with the human story, I mean, that's the interesting first step to me is where do you start if you're going to tell the human story?
Who is the character that we're talking about? And in essence, we're all right. We're going to crunch human beings down to an Adam-like character. All right,
as in ADAM or ATOM. Which one are you working on here?
Take your pick. we will crunch Adam down to his atoms, which
that's right.
Which we would do with any character, because ultimately we want to construct the character from the ground up.
Right.
From the moment when it goes from being ape to being human. And that's really the moment when our story begins.
I was putting in the notes, consciousness. To me, human consciousness is where I think a lot of the ancient stories, they wouldn't use those terms, but they're the source, at least for a lot of these creation stories, because you suddenly realize you're here, you're on this planet, you're living, you don't really know why you're here or why you're on this planet or how you came about. and how you can even think about those questions. And so one of the obvious things is to try to figure that out. Why are we here? What happened? So
I'm a huge fan of the historian Yuval Harari and his book Sapiens, and he describes a moment that is, when I first read this, it blew me away with just how, my God, yes, this, to get to us. Here's what had to happen. Allow me to put on my reading glasses. Our closest living relatives include chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. The chimpanzees are the closest. Just 6 million years ago, a single female ape had 2 daughters. One became the ancestor of all chimpanzees. The other is our own grandmother. That we came into being, really, it wasn't a fog. There was one practical event happened, and that our genetics tell us that this had to have happened. That at one moment we literally subdivided off within the same birth pot. What would seem to be indicated that we chimpanzees and us came from literally the same place, and some kind
of genetic
inside of us.
Yeah.
That I find, there is a moment of actual divergence, and from that moment on, something in us. Now, it takes a long time. It takes millions and millions of years, and even as we evolve, when we got to the place where there are Homo sapiens, our particular group of Homo, there was Homo erectus, Homo australopithecus. We're the most recent, not necessarily the last in the line, the most recent of the Homo genus. We are the sapiens. Or as we like to call ourselves, wise. Sapiens is wise. we're wise. We tell ourselves. Somewhere along the way, something happened inside here. Now, for 2 million years, even as we were Homo sapiens, we were okay. We were hunter-gatherers. Our brains did nothing more. We didn't create anything more complicated than a flint tool. Millions of years, nothing happens. And then, fairly recently, something does happen. And suddenly, Yuval Harari sees 3 key moments in our story. He describes the cognitive revolution, which is the moment we're talking about right this second, when we go from being sentient beings but without purpose to suddenly attaching ourselves to a higher purpose of some kind. We're asking a question that, we don't know if other animals ask. Maybe they do in their own way, and we just don't appreciate it yet. But anyway, there's the cognitive revolution, which kickstarted history, he says, about 70,000 years ago. Then there's the agricultural revolution, which speeds things up. That takes place about 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. And then the scientific revolution, which occurs about 500 years ago. And that's how he sees our story laid out. 3 important revolutions that are pivots away from how we were towards another way of being.
Yeah. So in some ways, that would be kind of the way you would tell the origins story, would be through his reading and development of the modern Western scientific evidence for how human beings became distinct from other creatures and then developed into what we are today. Is that fair?
But there are moments like the secret of fire.
Yeah.
There are things we can point to, when we figured out how to control fire, to start it. So fire was something that we could have when we wanted and hopefully turn off when we didn't. But we could, And that allowed us to cook our protein.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Cooked protein changed a lot of our ability to, well, that gave us advantages in terms of how our brains were able to then grow. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there's what the scientific approach to telling the story reveals is the chronology of our development from, and it's really, at the end of the day, storyteller that I am, I see human beings as a mad scientist. We have genius in us, but madness. And those two things, that's our duality.
Yeah.
It's the madness and the genius. We're the most amazing problem solvers on this planet anyway. Hey, we'll take on any other species. We'll out problem solve you. Yeah, we will. But we've been so successful at solving our problems that there are now way, way, way too many of us. And we are overwhelming the planet's ability. Well, we're overwhelming. Yeah, we're making the planet inhospitable for our own selves. We will be screwed over by our own success.
Wow. That's a depressing story. But let me, I want to jump in, your Yuval Harari is in some ways my Bible, but I want to clarify that because this is a real area where, at least in the Western world, there's been an awful lot of tension for centuries between science and religion. And I think, a couple of points I would want to make is, that it in a lot of ways, I would say that biblical faith doesn't have a dog in the fight that we've been fighting. And I'll tell you why. And I don't do dog fights, by the way. That's just a saying. I just want to clarify that out there. But thank you. So sure. Just in case you were wondering, that was not happening on the beach at the party. I promise. There were no animals there whatsoever. No animals were harmed in that party, for sure. Anyway, so the thing is, the way that I think the best way to read kind of the origin stuff of the Bible is to start at Genesis 12, actually, which is odd because we want to start at the beginning, right? Genesis 1. But if you start at Genesis 12, where Abraham, who, as far as we can tell, did not know the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob prior to that period. But at some point in Genesis 12, it talks about Abraham being told to leave what he knows, go to a land that God will show him, and God makes a promise to him, right? So there's a sense that there's a revelation of, a higher being in Genesis 12. And the best way to read the Bible is that Genesis 1 to 11 is actually from the point of feeling that they do come to understand this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then they say, well, what happened before Abraham and God had this experience? So that, and if you look, Genesis 12 forward is one type of story. Genesis 1 to 11 is different from Genesis 12 on. So there's a literary reason for that too.
Well, we also know, this was not written chronologically.
Sure.
The stories were not even put together chronologically. A lot of these stories spent 1,000 years evolving over the course of an oral tradition and evolving from what we don't know.
Right. But as many ancient things have done,
indeed.
They take a long time and in a lot of hands to develop the story. So the thing is that so if you're looking at Genesis 1 to 11, what that's saying is, where was this God that we've come to know through Abraham in everything that happened beforehand? And what's intriguing to me is that, number one, you get a lot of things that were common in the human understanding of creation in different parts of Genesis 1 to 11, things like the flood that we talked about. The flood's not just in the Bible. There are flood stories in other cultures. There's a part where it talks about the children of gods and humans kind of got together, or angels and humans, and had these mighty men of old.
Not an original idea as the was it J or M, the letters we assign the
sure
people we've identified as the authors, their particular voices, their particular ways of
right. There's some scholars that have really tried to go back as far as they can to what were the sources of Genesis 1 to 11 or more, and they've come up with theories on multiple sources and what their language was and all that.
At some point,
yep.
A human being must, inspired by whatever, the divine or simply just the nagging of the noise of their nagging family that they had to escape to get into their tent and just pretend, don't leave me alone, man. I'm going to write. Whatever the motivation was, at some point, a person took
a storyteller, we might say,
and they had an incredible story in their head, and
right, and so
no argument,
right. It was, but what they were doing was they were taking these answers that were out there in their day and common in their day, and they're saying, okay, given what we've come to know of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, how do we tell these stories? And that's why it's really interesting to take Noah and the flood and some of the other flood stories and compare them. And through the contrast, you get a sense of the points that they were trying to make. And then with Genesis 1 is poetic in its expression of the creation of the world. It's not a literary.
It's not. And if people would just back off of that, they would right. It is entirely possible to look at these texts with a certain kind of appreciation, because they represented an attempt with a limited knowledge base at the time, with more poetry at their disposal than any kind of knowledge whatsoever.
And in some
trying
ways,
to make sense of why are we here
right. And in some ways, isn't poetry possibly a better vehicle for telling the story of the original creation of all things? Considering
the fact that you can't, that there's no evidence,
right?
You can't tell it as nonfiction because you weren't there. You can only fictionalize it. So yes, it's and considering the massiveness of the event, creation, poetry and big music, it seems to.
And I think that's how the way you find the meaning in those texts is is you've got to let them tell you what the point that they're trying to make. And where we've run into a lot of trouble in the West is when theology was the queen of the sciences, and then Western science started to emerge and challenge some of the long-held beliefs. Then there was kind of this battle between science and religion, and religion started to harden their views of things. That if you look at people, prior to the Enlightenment or even prior to the 1900s in the US, there was much more flexibility on a lot of these issues. But it was when it felt like it was threatening some things that all those views hardened, and that's what got us into the weird situation. So let me just that is why I say that we don't really have a dog in this fight, in the sense that you don't have to say, do I believe, what Alan was talking about, or do I believe what the Bible says? Because it's much more nuanced than that. And the fact is, there are a couple of spots, like, if you believe that evolution was a process where there is absolutely no influence by any higher being, then you've got a problem. You've got a conflict that you probably can't solve. However, that is something that, though you can definitely find people that will strongly argue that's the case, you can also find some very intelligent people that know science that would argue that that's not the case, and it's beyond science to be able to say, who did it. And that's just not what science can tell us. And so you've got plenty of room to work with. Last thing I've got to make the point of. There's two other things, because I've run into this with so many people.
One, I'm sitting here quietly.
Where are the dinosaurs? Well, guess what? The dinosaurs were not the point. If it's Genesis 12 and then you're looking back at what you knew at that time and trying to figure out where was God in that, you're not going to do a description of dinosaurs. And the other is, where is this transition that Alan is talking about from apes to humans? Again, that's not what it was written to do, because Genesis 1 to 11 is not supposed to be something that answers all questions and covers everything for every generation for all time. That's a misunderstanding.
I would be willing to bet you if the people, most likely the men, who actually wrote this stuff, who actually, it was their inspiration, they put it down, and we're still talking about it today. If you got them into a room and we said, hey, people think, but what you said, because of what you said, that this is actual history. What do you think? They would look at you like you're a schmuck. Like,
well, I mean, they would
tell you I wasn't writing history.
Right.
I had no idea. I was making it up because I didn't know. I said, he would look at you like, you've got a microscope, you've got telescopes, you've got the internet. I didn't have that. Look at that, and then answer your question.
And I'd go most of the way with you on that. I think what they would say is, what do you mean by history? You've got to teach me how you guys see history, because I don't. That's a recent development in terms of the way we understand it. I think I don't think they'd say they were making it up, but I think what they would say is, I was working from my time, context, and all of that, and this is how we understand the world, and you have a different understanding of the world. And so it's your job, and that's what I like. It's kind of like, I feel like it's the job of people that want to take Genesis 1 seriously to figure out, given what we know scientifically now, then we get to say, okay, if we believe in the existence of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the science we have today, then how would we write the story of the beginning of all things? Now that's where, to me, it gets interesting. And that's where it gets interesting.
And there's wriggle room there, because really, as we discussed a podcast or two back, hey, if you take it down to quantum mechanics, what rules are you talking about?
Right. Sure.
There's a moment there when you take it back to the instance, the fractions of a fraction of a fraction after the Big Bang, when none of the rules make any sense.
And there's a couple.
How did we get from there to here?
There's a couple of big assertions, in Genesis 1 to 11 that relate to what you were saying in terms of what humans are, because Genesis 1, one of the things that's really clear from that, the point is that material creation is good. Material stuff is not bad, which is important to cite, because there are a lot of people, spirit's good, material's bad. Well, Genesis does not support that. Genesis, it was created and all of creation was good. And then you've got, your next story is the story of how it started fouling up, which shows, exactly that dual sense of humans are these amazing creatures, and yet they really screw things up a lot. And why is that? So you've got that same view.
But that is, there is in the pages, they recognize an awful lot of the human condition.
Exactly. And there's great stories about it.
They describe it in actually rather elegant, lovely terms. Yep. Where, and again, one of the things that human beings are always overachieving is this desire for knowledge, the mad scientist, as I think of him. Yeah. It's the first challenge that humans, well, if you look at the Eden story, you've got everything here you want. Just one tree, don't from that.
Right. Yeah.
Why? Yeah. But that's the tree you got to eat from. So the need to know the thing I'm not supposed to know.
Right.
Seems to be something, this need to know.
I mean, we all have that, right? I mean, seriously, you tell a kid, don't touch the cookie jar. Well, guess what they focus on? Suddenly the cookie jar is the only thing in the room,
But then it continues into the Tower of Babel.
Sure.
Because there's so
unraveling. I think that's one of the great things. I mean, it's tragic, but great about Genesis 1 to 11 is it's all created and it's really good. And then you just watch it all unravel. And I think those are key assertions, because what I love about that is when in our culture, the human story tends to, sometimes it moves in the direction of the Matrix, with this idea of like, we're just, we're the ones, we shouldn't even be on this planet, we're horrible. We should, I think that Genesis 1's important, which is like, no, actually, there's a lot that's really incredibly valuable in every human being. But that is at the same time not naive like some other storytellings, which is, oh, we're really all gods. And if we just realize we're gods, everything would be great. It's like, have you actually lived on this planet for very long? I mean, seriously, you've got to close your eyes to so much that's going on if you're going to believe that. But it's instead this wonderful combination, this tension between all the potential humanity has and these incredible flaws that we have that we seem to repeat again and again and again. And I like one theologian, I thought this was good, just try this on for size, but he said human beings are like a player piano that's off key. So it's like we play music.
How very Kurt Vonnegutian of him.
Yeah, that's right. It's like it's playing this music, but it's like that's almost beautiful, but something's not right here. And then other times it's much darker in certain times of history. And then there are other times where at least momentarily it's really beautiful. And it's like, wow, and it's that combo.
It is the dynamic tension in our character that makes us interesting.
Well, it is, isn't it? And that's the struggle, the way I see, like kind of every good story has a struggle or, something you're trying to overcome. And to me, that's the struggle. There's this darkness and light. There's this created good but fallen. There's whatever language you want to use, but there's this tension going on, and the constant question from a human angle is just, are we going to be able to pull this off? Which one's going to win? How's the story going to end anyway? Whether it's in an individual human life or the life of your family or the life of a community or a nation or the whole planet, there's always this threat that it's going to end up dark, but there's always this possibility that no, maybe it's going to turn it around, but there's a really like a struggle between the two, and there's two powers, and it's not really clear which one's going to win. Again, from a human angle. And I think I'm going to throw in, something that I like about the way the Bible works that actually challenges or doesn't leave it to just being a power fight between dark and light, because I think that when people see the world as just about power struggles between basically two different groups, we often end up justifying all sorts of horrendous things because those other people, well, I'm with the light and they're with the darkness, so I need to take them out. And I think the story, there's a much more elegant way to look at the story of humanity than that. But I'll stop right there. But do you agree? I mean, what do you see as kind of a primary struggle? Is it kind of on that same theme in terms of what are humans going to do or not do? What are we going to decide? Where are we going to go? That sort of thing? Or do you see it in some other way?
Our story, in many stories,
yeah,
is what has happened. And our survival is going to hinge on our ability to work together across continents, across ideologies. At a certain point, it's just going to be driven home that the more we invest in each other, the better we'll do at the end of the world. At the end of the day, the end of the world. Hopefully that was I misspoke, but strangely, part of our story is our ability to communicate we've gotten quicker and quicker at it. Ideas that used to take hundreds of years to be walked across a continent now happen instantaneously. And that more than anything has sped up our story because we are, after all, problem solvers and we're storytellers. And I think Other creatures are problem solvers. That's not unique to being human beings. Storytelling, I have a feeling, requires more. You got to use your hands at least, and if you don't have hands, if you're a bird, I don't know, your wings, it gets repetitious. There are a few animals with prehensile, something like opposable thumbs and hands, but yeah, storytelling, that's a complicated thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It requires a tremendous amount of common knowledge. And where did the story come from? Did the story pass? All right, is the story there embedded somehow in the mind? Not with humans, and it might be. I know in other animals, maybe, or is it passed from mother to child? No, storytelling, it seems to be a uniquely human thing.
Well, and I think the story that we tell is so influenced by our experience. And so much of it, I think we've realized more and more recently how much of the story, or at least the tone of the story, is often shaped by just how we're brought up. I mean, the first X number of years has a massive impact on what story is it that we tell ourselves and that our life,
And what part of what story are you part of?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, that's not to say you can't change the story. And I think some of the things we've talked about previously have been moments when we've changed the story by decisions that we've made. And that's one of the very hopeful things I think about humans. We're not locked into a story that we can't get out of, even though we have emotional times where we feel very locked in a story. But many times we can break out.
Well, we tell ourselves a lot of stories where predestiny and prophecy has been made, and so therefore, and so that kind of reduces our freedoms, because, oh well, if this was prophecy, then I'm just walking through. It's not even my prophecy; it's someone else. Yeah. I'm just another passenger here.
And another version, I was talking to some Hispanic friends in Mexico City, and we were talking about a saying, ni modo, which is like without mode or without meaning or purpose. And it was a phrase you'd hear in different situations in Mexico among some folks. But it was it was kind of like, well, stuff just happens, and there's almost a sense that that's a prophecy in a way. I mean, it's different, obviously, but there's a way that we kind of decide, well, this is just the way my life's going to be. I can't break out of it.
Yes.
And that's another way that we get stuck, is it's like, well,
we tell ourselves a story that this is the story, and we cannot change the story.
Right. And I think that's where, but if we can all really take more ownership of the story that we're writing with our life. The fact is, even if your story was written very poorly as you grew up, not by your fault even, but or even if it was by your fault, but the fact is, kind of like with this pandemic, we've got kind of a restart coming up, and yeah, the pandemic may come back. We don't know that, but the fact is, we've come out from a really challenging time, and we have a moment now to redirect a bit, and we've got to make some decisions, and those decisions are going to impact the story that we're telling with our life. And so we've got to decide, what am I going to do? And so it's a time of real possibility, but it's also a time where, some of us may be, I'm so tired from the pandemic that I'm just not even going to try. That's a possible option. Some people are going to say,
then they'd miss a day like we had last Saturday.
Exactly. I mean, seriously, it wouldn't have been hard for me not to have gone to the beach, because it was like, I'm used to being home. I don't want to drive in. We had to drive in some traffic. And man, I got used to traffic, but now I hate traffic, right?
It's
and the start
horrible.
and stop of traffic, it's like, I've got to relearn the skill. I don't know how many times I hit the brakes way too hard. Poor Cheryl's like, just because I'm not used to like starting and stopping and starting and stopping.
Now, fess up, Reverend Randy. How many of your fellow Angelinos did you wish dead as you were driving around amongst them?
I think the way that I handle that, I think, is I've actually watched more dash cam fail videos, and it's almost like through those, I just say, wow, what a bunch of idiots. And then I feel okay because, wow, that person's a bad driver, but they're not nearly as bad as the person I saw in that dash cam. Somehow that works for me. I'm not, offering that as a solution, the point being that one of the great things about the human story is we can have an impact. Now there are definitely people that have lived in times and situations where the things going on around you are so overwhelming that you have there's very little wiggle room in the story you can write. Yeah. But even in those, and that's where I think back to some of the prisoners of war in Vietnam, the American prisoners of war, some of them had memorized Psalms and Bible stories from when they were kids. They hadn't thought them for years. But when they were like, I think some of them were put in water under a bamboo grate thing for a period of time, they'd start reciting those things, and that would give them strength to persevere through. So they were writing the story by deciding, I'm not going to give up.
Yes.
I am going to continue to try to get myself through this. And I think, those, that's one of the amazing things about humans. We're so adaptive, we're so innovative, and we've got a drive in us. If we can connect to it, there's a drive in humans that's crazy.
The word is aspirational.
Yeah.
We're aspirational creatures. And we're not alone in this. We see an end product that does not exist.
Yeah.
And then we imagine a way to manifest it.
Right. Yeah. That's. I mean, and that's part of the genius of the way we're wired up, is just that we can do that, and that we can do that in a way that isn't disconnected from reality either. I mean, it's actually impacted reality,
and we can also connect it to our sense of morality.
Totally. Yeah, that's right.
And so that we put it at the service of whether that higher good is something beyond, or really it's just the rest of the human brother and sisterhood.
Right. Yep.
And everything in between hood.
That's right. Yep. And that's where, and again, I feel like we need like 3 more podcasts on this, because we've barely even gotten through the human story yet. But one of the things, there was a very popular book called This Present Darkness. Did you ever run across that? It was super big among some types of churches. It was by a guy named Frank Peretti. It sold
Ever-Present Darkness.
Yeah. This Present Darkness.
This Present Darkness.
Yeah. And it was this story, basically the way the world was in this story, was lots of demons, lots of angels, and humans being, having to choose between all of these forces. And the way that the story was set up, it was either good or evil, and either one could win. And it looks like evil might win a lot of the time, that sort of thing. So again, it connected with a number of folks in our society that were feeling like they were being overwhelmed by whatever forces, right? But there was this one professor I had who just a really sharp guy named Bob Gulick, and he had like the book out on the Sermon on the Mount at the time. It was like the primo one at the time. But he said he wrote
a lot of competition.
That's right. No, among scholars, there's a lot of competition on that.
And
so
ugly man.
I'm sure some of his work's a little passé at this point, because it was at least 20 years ago. But point being that he made a great point when he critiqued that book, and he made a great point, and he said, you know what, the way Peretti sees the world is not actually a Christian view of the world. And I was like, whoa, okay, you're going to get in some hot water there. He said, because when you look at the stories of Jesus and demons, Jesus and evil, there is never a question which is more powerful, ever. And you could extrapolate that into the Old Testament. There's never a question of whether God will win out. It's a question of whether God's just going to get sick of dealing with humans. That's the greater question. But it's not like, oh no, God's under threat and everything may fall apart on terms of light. But it was this proclamation that light is way stronger than darkness. It's not even a competition. That's not to say that darkness isn't real, isn't serious, isn't horrible. And so I like to take that view with me into my life and say, yes, there's a lot of darkness. It's horrible. It's painful. It's terrible, but it will not win. The light will win. This is how the struggle will win. Now, some would see that as purely aspirational. Some would see that as faithful. As far as this podcast goes, doesn't really bother me either way. Point being that I strongly believe that the darkness will not win out, and what I long for, so even with the climate debates and those kind of things, there's, it's almost like some of the darkest people with some of the some of these positions that are about the world ending basically at this point, if we don't act soon. I feel like there's a tendency or a threat that those narratives could become stories that are just only dark, and dark is going to win, and or humans are just parasites and there really isn't any light in humans, or that kind of thing. And to me, when we start to think that way, that's a really negative thing for humanity as a whole. And I don't just mean like, oh, have some positive vibes, man. I mean that it really starts to shape the way that we see the world and construct the world that makes it worse. And so I think that, having that, at least that they're even, but I would say that light, like love, one of the things I love in Harry Potter is it's like, you got this horrible Voldemort, right? But what is it that defeats Voldemort? It's love. It's that Voldemort has no clue about love. Voldemort thinks the darkness is everything. And it's this mom shielding her baby that stops the guy. Yeah, she dies, the baby doesn't, and long-term darkness is defeated. So, it's
yes, it is at the end of the day, it is love.
Yes.
And ultimately, yeah, the human story, if we can bring it around.
Sure. Good luck. Try, man. You're the storyteller. I want you to pull this thing around.
Now, we're in a time of love and hate.
Yeah,
we're bumping up
Definitely.
against it. We're
and fear and
well,
the fear,
you
the
hate
fear
the
and
thing
hate
you fear.
side.
Yeah, well, you hate the thing you fear, and
Sure.
part of the way to get you to hate things is to teach you to fear it, even though you really have nothing to fear.
And you can't love very well if you're dominated by fear. If you're going to really love other people, like we're talking about, love your neighbors yourself, that we've talked about again and again, you can't be dominated by fear. It's just the two don't work together. So if you're really fearful right now, that's something I would urge. You need to work on that in terms of your story, because you can't really love in the way that this world needs love if you're just working out of fear and hatred. You can't, period.
At the end of the day, what do we want from any story? We all want a happy ending of one kind or another.
Although like water for chocolate. Oh my gosh. Did you see the end of that? It was just
food, right?
Destruction. And then the curtains came down, and my wife and I were like, that was not an American movie. That was definitely not an American film, because it's like, wow. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
At the end of the day, we want to be happy.
Yeah.
I think we would all like to come to the last moment that we're here to feel loved, to feel safe, and to know that our children will be fine.
And that our life mattered. Our life made a difference.
That'd be nice too.
Yeah.
That'd be nice too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, the question that we have to ask ourselves about our story is, how do we get to that point?
That's right. That's right. Agreed.
Yeah, indeed. We do have a hand, all of us, in our own individual stories. And the more of us that can get that story right and take it away from a story about why you hate other people as to why. Yeah, the alternative. Won't preach the why or anything like that, but just the alternative, because that's the much more productive way to go.
Well, it is, because the two stories, basically, the two most common narratives that are out there right now for us in the US, and they're pretty destructive stories. And yeah, they're out there, they're in the air, but I think that's one of the things, you are responsible for your own story. Yes, you live within a wider story, but you're still responsible for that. And I would really hope for lots of people that become intentional storytellers that try to blur the lines between the two stories that are out there, because those are stories too. And some of it's right and some of it's wrong, but it certainly doesn't cover all of reality. And you got a lot of room to write your own story. And man, yeah, my hope is that we figure out in this post-pandemic period a story that is really going to take us to the things that we all desire, which is not disaster or the death of 50% or half or whatever it is, the other side of the US population. We would like to get to a place to where we find common ground and where we can celebrate things together and be happy together. And so let's write that story. Let's do our part,
Maybe, and the very best way to start with your own story, really.
Yes.
And tell your story.
That's right.
Honestly.
Yep.
Easier done than said, but on that bombshell.
That's right.
Deus Ex Machina.
That's right.
I enjoyed this story, Randy.
Yeah, no, this was good. And, again, it's kind of like we only got through half of the human story in a way, but that's the thing. This is
a more complicated story than we think every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just think back to the elections and the stories we thought were going to happen. We were right on some of those things, but there was a lot of other things that happened that we weren't even thinking about and continue to happen. So,
and the stories that are about to happen.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's going to be all sorts of stuff. I mean, I'm sure you can't even imagine.
Don't get us started. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
Watch us on YouTube, and
yes, yeah.
We appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. We will see you all next time.
We will. Thanks, Alan, too. Good.